House, and I am so excited to welcome you all here this evening for our discussion with Nicole Flattery. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone to please silence your phones. Our event tonight will consist, thank you, of about 30 minutes of discussion, followed by a reading and Q&A, and then we'd like to invite you all to join us downstairs for a light reception. This evening is part of a wider New Irish Fiction Symposium co-sponsored by the Society of Fellows and the Heyman Center for the Humanities at Columbia University, and we invite you all to join that day-long symposium this Saturday. We are delighted to have one of the writers on the symposium here with us tonight. Nicole Flattery is an award-winning fiction writer based in Galway. She is the winner of the On Post Irish Book Award, the Kate O'Brien Prize, the London Magazine Prize for Debut Fiction, and the White Review Short Story Prize. Her work has appeared in The Stinging Fly, The Guardian, the White Review, and the London Review of Books. Her short story collection, Show Them a Good Time, was published in 2019, and her recent novel, Nothing Special, will be released to U.S. readers in July. Nicole will be in conversation with Ireland House Assistant Director Caroline Heafey, who is also a doctoral candidate in English at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And I am pleased to now turn the evening over to both of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Elizabeth. Can everyone hear okay? Just want to make sure, all good? Awesome. And Nicole, thank you so much for being here. We are delighted. It's delighted to welcome you back to Ireland House. And we are delighted also to partner with the Heyman Center up at Columbia. So if anyone's around on Saturday, please do check out the symposium. So kind of thinking about Saturday's symposium, the theme is centered around new Irish fiction. And I wonder if we might just start off the conversation, if you could offer some thoughts on the new Irish fiction coming out of Ireland at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is my mic working? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it's quite varied, and there's a lot of it. We're doing very well in that respect. A lot of work by female writers, as we know. But yeah, I feel like it's all been kind of lumped together as like Irish writing, which is like sort of frustrating, even though everyone's influences are like extremely diverse, which you can tell. But once a book comes out from an Irish female writer, it's just an Irish female writer, you know?
Yeah.
But it's great. It's great. We're all there together. And we'll all be there on Saturday together as well.
Could you speak a little more about maybe your influences specifically then?
Yes, like Irish influences?
Or just in general, yeah. I know in Show Them a Good Time, a lot of different cities come up and, different places. It's not just Irish-centered, so yeah.
Yeah, I feel like my influences are varied. I'm very influenced certainly by American writers. A big influence of mine was Mary Gateskill. I remember reading her collection for the first time here, actually, when I was like 24, 25, Bad Behaviour. I really loved that collection. And Laurie Moore is another big influence of mine. I really, film is a huge influence on me. It just sounds so lazy. Like I don't read books. I actually just watch a lot of film. They're under 2 hours, so it takes less time. So yeah, I do. I think a lot about film when I'm writing, and different filmmakers and things. But then for it was so different, you know. For the stories, I was generally thinking about the craft of short stories, and when you're thinking about the craft of short stories, you are thinking about a lot of Irish writers like Kevin Barry, Colin Barrett, William Trevor, Anne Enright. So I feel, that's what I was thinking about when I was writing the stories. And then when I was writing Nothing Special, obviously all my influences were a lot of Warhol stuff, and a lot of Warhol's own writing and films and everything. So yeah, it's for both books like quite different.
Yeah. Maybe for folks who, because it's not out in the States yet, could you tell us a little bit about what Nothing Special is about?
Yes, of course. I've been doing this a lot because it's out in the UK this month. But it's about two girls who've been tasked with typing up Andy Warhol's novel A, which was recorded in a tape recorder. It's first person, and Warhol isn't in it that much, which has been commented on frequently.
No, but that's, I mean, I actually quite enjoy, it's really not about Andy, right? It's about the characters themselves. And thinking about, now just thinking about film and art, how did kind of maybe intertextual influences come into your writing process when working on that, or the stories?
Yeah, on this particularly, I had to do like quite a bit of research, and I felt like very lucky because there is so much, like such a huge quantity of stuff about Warhol. Like, you know, there's a lot of films, there's a lot of photos, there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of biographies. There's like everyone who was around that time wrote an autobiography. Like there was just so much stuff, so it all kind of fed in. And if I didn't use like anything directly, like if I felt like I really tried to stay away from doing like obvious kind of scene setting, but I felt like every kind of idea I read or every kind of fed into it in some way, you know? Yeah.
What was the research process like for the novel?
Long, arduous. The first part of it was very fun. I was like, I need to go to every Warhol exhibition all over the world to understand him. And then it's quite interesting, like, you know, I feel like it was something that I thought I had like a very superficial understanding of, the factory, which I feel like we all have because, you know, there is like those iconic images or like, you know, Edie Sedgwick or, you know, we have such that film Factory Girl with Sienna Miller playing Edie, or any kind of Warhol appearance in a film, like he turns up in the Doors film and he's just this kind of parody. So to like understand, I thought I had like an understanding of it, but then it's like anything else, the closer you kind of look into it, the more difficult it becomes. And one thing that I found, like, he lied so much. So even when you go through the biographies, you're like, he didn't say, he said he was from somewhere else, or this happened, or you're really like constantly like correcting and like changing your mind. I changed my mind about him so much when I was like researching. I was like, you know, he was everything that you think he was. He was superficial, or, you know, he was manipulative, and then you would read something else and be like, actually no. So that was really interesting. It was almost like getting to know a person, like in life, you know, you're constantly assessing and correcting your first, you know, opinion.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was tough though.
Is that why he's not in the novel as much?
Yeah, maybe. I think that I felt if I were to, you know, if he were to be in it, firstly, that he would overpower it. That he would come in and it would be like an actor just kind of stealing the show. The reference I always kind of make is Jaws. So it's like, don't show the shark. don't show it, and like then it will be just kind of underneath the surface, and people will picture it, but it won't be obvious. And then the other thing was I didn't want to do something like incredibly crude and have him be this kind of, you know, megalomaniac or narcissist, or because I wasn't entirely sure he was, you know. So yeah, I thought a more thoughtful appraisal would be to put him in the background. And then the other kind of thing that I was thinking of, and I've said this quite frequently, is that like I just really was thinking about like how power operates in a room, and you never ever really get close to the most powerful person. You know, they don't come in and make themselves known, but everything is directed towards them. And I thought it would be more interesting to have them in the background, because the person pulling the strings is generally in the background, you know.
Yeah, well, and in the novel, it seems that the women who are kind of on the margins then get re-centered, right? And then he gets subverted to the margins. So, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense to me. In thinking about who's kind of operating in the periphery and then switching that for the reader. I wonder if we could talk about what the process of writing this novel was like. I know you told me earlier it was a pandemic project, so I'm thinking about what it must have been like to write a novel very much about New York, not in New York, and you know, from afar and from lockdown.
Yeah. Critics are probably reading it being like, oh, New York sounds very like Dublin, very like Mullingar. Like, it was difficult at the time, and like I I wasn't one of those writers, or maybe no writers did actually enjoy it, but I certainly didn't enjoy lockdown. I didn't find it good for my creativity. I didn't find it, you know, like a refreshing break from people. I really like people. I like spending time with them. So I found it very, like, difficult to focus. It felt very intense at times, you know, because I felt like I was thinking about things that are like, you know, you even though this is obviously separate from me, but you do put your whole self into a novel, you know, like, and there's a lot of me in this book, and I felt like I never got a break from myself, and I really, really wanted one. But I was thinking also that the New York is there, and particularly in the opening chapters, but then when it moves into the factory, it becomes that world, which is like extremely enclosed and very focused on their work, which is what happens when you're very focused on any project, you know, like this is a novel in some ways like about writing a book. So everything just gets kind of narrowed down, and like they have this kind of weird tension as well between the two girls, and that also focuses your attention. So I think where the place you are just kind of like disappears as well in certain ways. And I do that in all my writing. I don't think I'm a writer of place at all. I think that the place like shifts into the kind of psychology of the characters. So I don't feel, I don't even think my stories are very Irish sad sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in relation to your collection of stories and thinking about it coming out just before the pandemic. And, you know, a lot of the stories, it's always kind of concerning women who feel sort of trapped in a certain way, right? There's a certain claustrophobia or entrapment of circumstances. And obviously it would have been impossible to predict the entrapment that we all then felt. Yeah. But that's interesting to think about place coming from the psyche. Could you speak a little bit more about the difference in kind of transitioning from the collection of stories to the novel?
Yeah, it's strange because the novel is quite short. Like, I think it's only 250 pages out in July, only 250 pages. But I feel like I'm a writer of, I will always cut more than I keep. I always, I'm going to lean towards the shorter side, always. And I think that's just something that writing short stories really taught me. And I never really think, how can I expand this out? I'm always like, how can I cut this? So I cut a lot. I wrote many chapters that I didn't include. I'm sure I have them somewhere if the world's demanding them. But I cut a lot. I rewrote a lot. And I don't think I'll ever write a long novel. Yeah. But the other thing was, like, a lot of my stories are sort of voice-based. So you can kind of read along for like 10, 12 pages and be like, that's sort of funny. She's sort of strange, or she's sort of, you know, unhinged, or she's going to do something. What's she going to do? Whereas I don't think that voice works so well across like 250 pages. And that was like a massive thing I had to kind of learn. Because I don't think any of those stories could be sustained for a novel length thing. So I had to, the process of rewriting that was like something that I was trying to learn, you know. Yeah.
Well, sound is everywhere in the novel as well. That's something that I love so much about it, is that you really seem to kind of engage all of the senses. It's not just the visual. How does I guess my question is, speaking of it's the sounds of the city, how does sound kind of influence your voice when writing, or maybe, you know, I don't know, how do you kind of go about engaging the senses when you're thinking through the novel, or when you're writing it, or the stories for that matter?
Yeah, I've never thought about that. I don't. Sometimes I listen to music. Often I don't. When I was thinking about, when I was writing it, I was thinking about the process of like listening to tapes for like however many hours a day they do it, like 8 or 9 hours, and then like how that would like feed into your mind, and then you know how it would be so difficult to return to reality. I think she said that when she takes up her headphones and things, like every street noise is like amplified and things like that. So I was thinking about sound and like just voices in your head more than anything else. And then I was, not that it's not a novel isn't a comment on anything, but it was thinking about like how, you know, how like noisy it is right now, and almost like that kind of like voyeurism we all have like access to like right now. Like they're watching people across the room at the factory, people who they perceive are more glamorous and exciting, and listening to them. And but yeah, I was thinking of that also in a modern kind of context as well, you know.
Yeah. What was it like kind of putting your mind in 1966 in a 17-year-old's head in New York, you know? It feels like so kind of out of time and place from the present in certain ways.
Yeah, it was. And I actually found the New York thing fine. It was the 17-year-old girl thing that I found very difficult. I really struggled to remember what it was like to be 17. I don't think it was good. So I think I got that part right. But yeah, there's chapters set in like contemporary time in the novel, so she's kind of older, and then it goes back to, and she's 17 again. So, and I knew I wanted to do that quite early. I knew that I wanted to kind of show the span of her whole life, and show that this actually had an effect on her kind of whole life, even though it was something that just happened to her when she was 17. I think that I was just thinking of like how kind of desperate for approval you are at that age, and how much you're kind of looking for anything or some acceptance somewhere, rather than, you know, it's so hard to kind of be your own person or make decisions at that age. And it's quite funny because I've read a few of my reviews now, and they're all like, May is a very vexing character, she's very difficult and awful. And I'm like, oh my gosh, she's only young, she's only a child.
I didn't find her that difficult, actually.
So yeah, I was trying to show that, you know, I think she is actually I found her very interesting in the sense that I think she is someone, even though she is young, trying to figure out, you know, trying to make the right decision, and trying to think for herself, and that's kind of complicated, you know, like it's not easy to do, and I was trying to show that it's not easy to be like a good friend, or to like think independently, or do any of those things, especially when everything is crowded in and on top of you. And so I wanted to show that, you know, that it's complex, and she's complex as a result, you know.
And she doesn't have a mother that's modeling anything as well, right?
No,
So
no, her mom is. But yeah, she's got a difficult relationship with her mother. Yeah.
Yeah, could you speak a little bit more about that, the mother-daughter dynamic?
Yeah, it was funny. I read the first chapter at my launch in Dublin, and it's all like, my mother was an alcoholic. My own mother was there. And I was like, not you. But I think once again, like it was more, they have a very difficult relationship, and then in the first chapter, which is set in 2010, they have come back together and bonded, and in a certain way, you know, like her isn't particularly maternal or anything, and you know, quite distant from her daughter, and almost a little bit maybe competitive with her or whatever. But I felt, yeah, it's just like a complex relationship that they are trying to like figure out. I feel like in all the stories as well, and a lot of the stories I write about mother-daughters and things like that. And I did an event in the UK in the LRB bookshop, and Claire Louise Bennett was interviewing me, and she was like, she asked a question that was something like, do you think you need to be free of your mother? Do you think you need to run away from your mother? And I was like, I hope there's no mothers and daughters in the audience. There was. And they came up to me after. But I thought it was an interesting way to, like, May is trying to just like be separate from her mother in some way, but then also feeling, you know, and Shelley is the same, like feeling like she can't escape her parents or what she was born into. And I think that the novel is essentially about that. Like, can you like change the place you're from? Can you be a different person? And they're looking at these opportunities these kind of glamorous people are presenting of, like, you know, like killing the person you kind of once were to become something new and transformed, and that's what they're desperate to do. And May's that like a desire is tied up with her mother, you know.
Yeah, and going back and forth between the 17-year-old and the kind of middle-aged perspective, the relationship doesn't, I mean, it changes as relationships do evolve, but it's still very complex, especially towards the end of the mother's life.
Yeah.
The relationship I'm curious about too is the character of Mikey. Or could you talk more about that? Yeah, the kind of family dynamic that we see in the novel as well.
Mikey is her mother's not boyfriend, but a stray man she's taken in, and actually to me Mikey was the most uncomplicated character in the book. He's actually the one I have the most affection for.
Yeah.
And I really like their relationship. I don't think you see it too often in novels, or I think maybe we're used to seeing, like, I'm sure when he was introduced, certain readers are going to be like, oh no. But yeah, they're just, they just have a good friendship, and they're very close. And he's also, like a sort of double to like Onadine and Warhol. And actually the novel is full of kind of doubles. That he's interested in art and things, but doesn't have like the same access as they do. But tries to show her kind of different things. They go and see Blow Up at the start of the book and things. But yeah, I really, when I was writing Mikey, I had a lot of love for him, and still do.
Yeah. He strikes me as a real nice contrast to, like, there are lots of men kind of not treating May well, right? And Mikey just kind of seems like the safe person for her to go back to. I was curious too, so the review in The Guardian used the term millennial work to describe this novel, and in the context of kind of a lot of writing that we're seeing at the moment. And it struck me because we don't usually see writing classified in terms of generations in the same way, right? So I don't know, I'm wondering what you might think about the idea of millennial writing, and especially millennial writing from the perspective of other generations.
Yeah, I think there is definitely, like, well, because I review books, like sometimes, I think there is like a millennial writing, and a lot of it is about work, precarious work, kind of alienation, the internet. That's an obvious theme, and yeah, I can see. I didn't notice that actually. I poured through my reviews and read them very carefully, and I did not notice that phrase.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's another grievance. Or
a compliment.
I think I often write about work, and I've written all about work in the story collection as well, because I think about work all the time. And I, the first story in the collection, Showed Them a Good Time, they're working in this garage, and the garage isn't real. And that was like because it was a thing happening in Ireland at the time when I graduated college, which was like called the Jobs Bridge Scheme. And then you could go and you could get, they put you in a job and they would barely pay you, and it was good to teach you. And I was like, well, what is how far can they take this? Like, what can they do to make them feel like we're all working, and it is something that, like, because work has changed so much for our generation, that I feel that it's a natural thing to write about, and grow frustrated. But I actually was thinking less about work when I was writing this novel. I was thinking more about surveillance. Like, I was thinking more about, like, listening and watching, and rather than work. But a lot of people have been like classifying this as a work novel, which I don't think it is, because also she has a stranger relationship with the material than a job,
Yeah. What's the relationship between maybe labor and art then? Kind of either in this, I think it's in the stories, but as well as in the novel. I mean, so much of what May and the other typists do is they labor for the art, right, that Andy's ultimately doing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that is like the big Warholian question, isn't it? Like, I find that really fascinating, because even when you go through you go through all the books, and it's sort of like looking at these paintings and you're like, some of them I don't even think he made, you know? So yeah, I feel that a lot of kind of difficult work is passed off, like, you know, you can get people to do a lot of things for you if you pass it off as art, you know, which is like what Warhol did, you know, in some respects. And when they're working on this novel, she says that she's like, I'm not a typist, I'm a writer, you know. She fully believes that, even though she's typing up someone else's work. So it's a good way. It's always been a good way to convince people to do what you want.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you maybe read for us for a little bit?
Yeah. I'll read the first section. Not the whole thing. I'll read for 5 minutes. This is set in 2010. My mother had a book she liked to read to me as a child. She must have discovered somewhere that it's good to educate your child. She must have encountered that fact amongst a haze of other facts at the time. She might have even once seen a mother and daughter on a bench working their way through the pages of a book, the mother pausing only to kiss the daughter on the forehead. They probably looked like they were having the best time of anyone on the planet. This was the type of image that would have obsessed and overwhelmed her. I think that she got it in a gift shop. It had that sort of sheen, the invariable pleasantness of the gift shop. In the book, there were different types of farm animals with various attributes listed alongside them. I guess my mother felt sort of bad about raising me in a city amidst the noise and knife crime, the graffiti scrawled everywhere, signalling mass discontent. The farm arrived late. I was much too old for the book. I understood that even then. I was at the age where I was starting to become aware of the many unconventionalities of our lives, our family arrangement, our dreary rattling apartment, the aura that seemed to engulf us as a trio, the diner, our dirty and somber street. My father wasn't around, and even if he had been, my mother insisted he wouldn't have had any interest in reading. He wasn't smart. She wasn't embarrassed by this. Why did the men she slept with have to be smart? That's vanity, my mother declared. She believed many things to be vanity, like you need to be smart to point at a page. So I never got to know my father, and he never got to know the book in which sheep took on existential qualities. They appeared sinister to me whenever my mother and I sat on the floor together. There was something happening under their dry, calm frolicking. If it was late, if my mother had been drinking, a lot of what she said was unpredictable. She often pointed at a cow and said, "That's a sheep." "A sheep?" I repeated. I knew it was dangerous to correct her. I knew in my heart that it wasn't a sheep. A sheep would have had a halo of fuzz encasing its cartoon body. The accused animal stared out of the pages as if to say, "I've done nothing wrong." It was one of my happiest memories. My mother's presence and undivided attention was special, irresistible. I think that everyone felt that way around her. I liked being close to her soft face, watching her gentle frown lines, her breath sweetened my ear as she whispered lies, silence, nothing, my mother's trembling hands turning the pages. Then she pointed at another animal, a donkey maybe, and say, "That's a sheep, a sheep." I repeated. I went along with all of it. I did until the end. Whenever I was in my mother's retirement village, they sometimes called it a village, as if they were all careening down country lanes on a bicycles, and a nurse inquired what my mother and I had been talking about. I simply said, "Sheep." This is the type of tepid, pointless humour I bring to my daily life now. Where I have lived for the last three decades, it's not about wit. We don't have those sorts of desires. It's more of a matter of corresponding. I'm having as ordinary a day as you. My thoughts are as standardised as yours. The laughs are chaste here. Okay.
I think if we're good on time, we can open up to Q&A. Folks have questions? I think there's a mic, yeah.
Thank you for a lovely evening. I liked the interview very much, and the reading, what you just read. A question, the short story collection and now the longer work. When you sit down to write the longer or the shorter, do you know the last page before you write the first?
No.
Okay.
I'm really I'm not a good planner. My friends are laughing. No, I'm not a good, I don't plot anything. I didn't know until I finished a whole draft even how it would end. And I often am very surprised by my own characters, which in a good way, I think. I'd be interested in trying, I'm working on something new now, and I think I will actually have to plot this in a way I didn't have to do this, but I'm interested in trying different methods because I'm so I'll just sit down today and I'll just write this. But yeah, maybe someday I'll know the Annie.
Can I just ask, just a curiosity now, on a short story, maybe 30 pages, and if you're only 30 pages, I'd almost be thinking to myself, I only have 30 pages. I would almost want to have an inkling of the end, but you don't need it.
No,
Okay.
because I redraft a lot. And actually, when I was writing story, someone said to me before, they were like, the ending of the story is always somewhere in the story, and I do agree with that. And when I get to the end, and I go back, and I can always find it. And yeah, but I never know how it's going to end. I often never know how it's going to start or what's going to happen in the middle. Or
So the end is something to be excavated.
Yeah.
I like that.
Kind of similar to the last question. Do you think coming up in the short story workshop model of writing doesn't prepare you for writing a novel? Let me rephrase that. Is there anything that coming up in the short story tradition didn't prepare you for with writing a novel? And do you think this is a problem that a number of young writers face, given that so many writers now go through MFA programs that are workshop short story based?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was unprepared for writing a novel. And actually when the stories came out, I said a lot of times, I was like, I actually think writing a story is harder than writing a novel. And that is not true. But I did an MA years ago when I was 23. And I did have workshops. And yeah, I found them incredibly useful at the time. But I do think it's a sort of different set of skills that the novel requires, and it requires a little bit more patience, which I had to learn because I feel you can write a story relatively quickly, and then but maybe not that quickly. There is stories in my story collection that took me several months, but it's we're talking about work again, but it's such a job to get up, and some days with a novel you might not write anything, or you might write 400 words and then you might delete them the next day. So yeah, it's just sort of a patience and time and all those terrible things to write a novel.
Are you working on another novel?
Yeah. Not right now.
Not right now?
No.
Okay.
Well, no, right now I am, but not right not this month.
Sounds good.
I was very curious about your earlier comment describing your own writing style as not being interested in place. Mm-hmm. And I'd just love to hear you talk more about why you're not interested in that, or what you think not thinking about place affords you as a writer. I'm very interested in place, so but it's not meant as an antagonistic question. I'm just really would love to hear you talk more about, what that affords you to not have to think about that as you're writing, sort of.
Well, I think that the thing is in Ireland, we have so many writers, and it's they have every single county covered. You're I can't write about Mayo, and I can't do Dublin, Joyce did that, and I can't do, so it's not that I don't think about play, and actually, in the stories, it's very clearly the town I grew up in. If you know the town, actually, so many people have said it to me. But I was also thinking about I don't, I like just sort of, I think it's the way the characters are thinking about things, so everything just becomes sort of, maybe the characters are depressed or feeling like extremely like distant from themselves, so everything just sort of blends into one. The place itself becomes sort of faceless or like something to be escaped from. Also, I'm from the Midlands of Ireland, and there's a lot of small towns in the Midlands, and they all have the same like structure. It doesn't matter which town you're from. There's like a petrol station, there's a pub, or 6 pubs. There's, you know, so you drive through the Midlands and every single town looks the exact same, and it sort of does leave like, you know, like you could be kind of anywhere. And that's like a particular, like I say I'm not a writer of place, but that's a particularly like Midlands thing, I really feel. People always say, they're like, I just drive through the Midlands. It's like I don't even see anything. You know, they're trying to get to the more beautiful part of Ireland, like the West or the city, and it's like this big nothing there. But I really like nothing places. God, like I hope there's no one from Mullingar here. I really like nothing places. I really like places that I don't know. They feel like they slip outside like time a little bit. So that's how I was like petrol stations or towns that you don't think of often. But I never start with place is what I feel. I always start with character rather than place, even though I know so many Irish writers that are so particular to place that I feel like I could be given one of their stories blind and I'd know who it was, you know. But yeah.
The passage you read seems very special, but yet you landed on a title, Nothing Special. So can you talk to how you arrived at that title and any other titles you considered?
I didn't consider any other titles. This was the one. Actually, it's based on, I read somewhere that Warhol wanted to do like a TV program in the late 80s, and he wanted to call it Nothing Special. So I was like, that's a good title. It's a very easy title to dismiss, but I thought it would be funny. So yeah, I really wanted to call it this from the beginning. And I really enjoy titling things. I like titling all my stories and everything, and yeah, it's a fun part.
Does the title come before the place?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the title always before place.
I maybe have a kind of follow-up question to do with humor. The short stories they're funny, but sometimes it's sort of a wry humor or humor that's based around kind of getting a joke or not getting a joke that some characters are in on and some aren't. Does humor play a role in the novel as well? And how do you write humor?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the novel is not as funny. I think it definitely does play a part, and I think that a lot of the humor comes from how the characters kind of look at the world, and then in the stories particularly, I don't know, I get I get quite impatient when things aren't like a little bit funny, because I think most things are in life, even particularly when something's like very difficult, and that is like, I suppose that's quite Irish, like, you know, and then I feel like you could have, yeah, I think you can do a lot, like on the simple level. I think you can do a lot with humor, as in like it's not to use it as a tool, like obviously its own thing, but I think, you know, you can really, if you make someone laugh for like 3 or 4 pages, you can really stick the knife in, you know, when the thing kind of comes. So yeah, I always use humor as deflection, you know. I use it a lot in my own life. So to write characters that aren't funny, when most people I now know are pretty funny, would seem untrue. Yeah.
Sorry if I missed it, but how did you pick Warhol as your topic that you really wanted to focus on and travel the world to get to know? And after learning all the different iterations and versions of him, as you went deeper and deeper, who did he end up to you, even if he's not core to this book?
Yeah. I knew that I read somewhere, I think it was, I can't remember where it was, but I read somewhere about a novel, the novel that Andy wrote or recorded, and I thought that sounded really interesting. I was like, that sounds like something I want to read, so I ordered it and I read it. It's very difficult to read. Actually quite good though. Obviously, like I have to defend it, it's good. And I just was interested in the idea, you know, you talk now, like you were asking about art and labor. I was very interested in the idea of working on something, and like obviously you put, even though she might not write any of this, she still puts herself in it, like, you know, the two girls do, they have like spelling errors, they try and then for you to be out in the world and like it has no trace of you. And that I thought was like a sort of like modern idea, because, you know, we read now of like, you know, I'm sure like directors have like sat in the cinema and watched a film that they made and not recognized it, or someone's written a script and not recognized it. These people are being like scrubbed from their own work. And I think it's like such a horrible, alienating kind of idea. And that's what I wanted to really look at. That was the idea that I was really thinking about. Who did Warhol end up being to me? I need to write another book so I can get away from him. No, I really found it very complicated. Like in a way that I thought it was going to be simple, and that he was just, you know, I think we see like him as this like 1980s figure, the way he was later in his life, which is like quite like distant, like not there, you know, very careerist, very money focused, like all those kind of photos where he just looks like death, you know, like it's like a death mask and things. But then like the early versions of him, like in the 60s when he was energetic and, you know, you get like incredibly smart and creative and doing all these incredibly interesting things and bringing these people together and, you know, finding these superstars, like it's not easy to do. I felt very conflicted then, because I do feel that the friendships that I'm kind of writing about in the book that he had with like Onadine and Edie, and I think they were more real than we sort of would probably give him credit for. So I wanted to show that kind of side of him as well. So yeah, the thing about someone like him, everyone has different stories. Like, you know, some people say he was incredibly generous with his time, and other people say he was this or that. It's a figure like that just like disappears into everyone else's. There's one biography of him. I think it's Victor Bach's. I can't remember which one it is, but it ends. Warhol dies, and there's like a big long list of everything he has in his bathroom cabinet to like keep him alive and keep him young looking. You know, he could be quite vain and stuff. And I was like, if someone did that to me when I died, and they went through everything I had, and they listed all, it's like the people that maybe he was surrounding himself with didn't have the best intentions towards him either. So like, who can you actually, you know, the novel is very paranoid, and I really wanted to capture that. And it's like, but also who could he trust, you know? Yeah, so there was a lot of, I had no defining opinion on him. I'll probably change my mind tomorrow. Actually, I don't like him.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure listening to you read and talk. I have a question circling back to other Irish writers. I'm curious how you, coming from a country with such a wonderful, rich literary tradition, you sort of position yourself and navigate coming out of the tradition. I wonder if it's ever there's ever a pressure writing the shadow of such like great previous Irish authors.
I don't know. I do think I felt that when I was younger, that I felt like all of them were really good, and there was only one way to be an Irish writer, which was to write about the church and, you know, the field, and various things in the field. And I really felt that pressure when I was like starting out, and like someone was like to me, stop doing this, like stop. Like all my stories initially were like about like, you know, fathers working the farm, and they were all heavy drinkers, and they were like, this has nothing to do with your life. I was like, yes, but it is important that I write this. And I think that, yeah, like I was saying, it's become so, there's so many different Irish voices now that I feel like it's quite exciting time to be like a a younger writer starting out and reading all these people and being like, I could do this, or this person's like doing this, and they've moved away from like, like I'm thinking of like Nisha Dolan's book is set in Hong Kong, or like like Sally's books are set in universities and things like that. So people it's not one big defining thing anymore. I never think about being an Irish writer. Yeah, if I can avoid it. I will be thinking about it on Saturday, obviously. So we'll all be there.
Hello. I had the fortune of having read the book already, so this is quite specific. But I noticed that May essentially gets the job through the doctor.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering whether he was based on real life, or if not, how you arrived on that being the avenue into the typist position.
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, there's a doctor that May goes to see, and he's like a strange kind of figure, and he gives her, the direction to go to the factory and whatever. That is based on a real person that I read about in Edie, An American Girl, which is a really brilliant novel about Edie Sedgwick. It was written by Jean Stein. It's an oral biography, and I'd really recommend it. Actually, it's probably one of the best books I read. But I was thinking about him a lot, and then I was thinking sort of like, in like a sort of Alice in Wonderland kind of way, like he has to be the person that like leads her there. He was a doctor that basically you could go and see, and he'd like pump you full of drugs and things like that. And that's who she finds. But yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned the Dubliners before, and I was in a Zoom group, and we just ended up finishing. And I read the collection before, but this time it really impacted me. The desperateness of the situation of these people, but you know them. Some of the stories almost read like a film. They're so incredible. But with global cities the way they are now, every city, do you think anyone could write the Dubliners today?
I don't know. I also feel like the Dubliners is such a good collection. Like, it was one of those books that I felt like I had to read, and I approached and I was like, oh, and then you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Someone probably could, probably not as good. They will try, but I know exactly what you mean, and I think it does come back to what I was saying about place, as in like, I do think, like, even over the last decade, or even since COVID, I was saying that every place is becoming more like every other place. Like, even cities are just becoming so uniform and have the same chains and and I see it even with Dublin, like the same chain bars opening up, the same hotels, the same, and like, losing a certain thing that makes it unique, and I think that's going to change everyone's writing a little bit. And make it less specific, maybe, as the world feels less specific.
I think we might have time for one more question if there's one.
You had a very good question about endings earlier, I think. And I was wondering about beginnings, like both how you pick your beginning and how you start a novel, how you start writing.
With this novel specifically, I knew that I wanted the mother-daughter relationship to be the kind of focus point. So I knew I wanted to start with the two of them. Someone actually pointed out to me, and I was like, I'm going to take that, pretend it's my own thought. But the book starts with them reading a book, and it ends with her kind of being like, oh, I was under I'm underlining passages in a book, and then obviously it's all about writing a book and thing. And it wasn't something I even noticed, although I'm sure I did it. I'm sure it was me, and I thought about it, but I didn't notice these like parallels. But I don't on just like how I start. I think I start with dialogue. Like I will write down a bit of dialogue, and actually, I think that like these characters only started to seem very real to me when they started talking to each other. So yeah, I think I generally start there.
Well, thank you. This has been wonderful. Thanks so much.